So welcome to everybody. You guys are the diehards of the show, hanging on to the very end of everything, and that's great. So I gave this talk yesterday morning, right at the beginning of the conference, and a lot of folks had a lot of questions about Alaska, a lot of things that we discussed and talked about, and with a larger audience that we had then, it was a little more difficult to do the interactive thing. So the advantage of this afternoon is that we'll hopefully have some more interaction. So if you've got any questions throughout the talk, raise your hand and we can kind of go off on some rabbit trails whenever we have the desire to. So just a little bit about myself, and then we can kind of find out what everybody's plans and goals are here in the audience. My name's Adam White. I've been involved with the Alaska Airmen's Association for going on 13 years now. Various roles throughout those years. Started out as just a member, then as a volunteer, doing lots of other things. Somehow got suckered into being on the board of directors, and then at that point was the president of the organization for about 4 years. Time limited off the board, and then started doing more government legislative affairs type work for the association. I've been in Alaska going pretty close to 24 years now. I've been doing a lot of flying in Alaska, pretty close to 5,000 hours, 90+% of that time is off airport in Alaska, what we call landing on something other than an improved surface, whether it's floats, wheels, or skis. Some of the other hats that I wear in Alaska, being involved with local volunteer fire department and the community that I live in. So that's exposed me to a lot of search and rescue type efforts. So I have some pretty strongly held opinions about survival gear and how you should equip your airplane if you want to be found. Let's put it that way. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those things throughout the day today. Those are the two aircraft that I primarily fly these days. The top one, M7 Maul, floats, wheels, and skis depending on the season. Right now that aircraft is on skis. We've had a really good year so far with snowfall, and so that's allowed me to get out and enjoy Alaska on skis, which is a great way to see the state. In summertime it's on floats, and that's also a great way to see the state. The bottom aircraft is a Cessna 206. Those of you who are familiar with 206s will notice that something weird about that airplane. Anybody know what may be different about that 206 from what most people would associate? It's a P model. It's not the U model. So this is a passenger version, not pressurized. That's not what the P stands for. P stands for passenger model. So it's got two big doors in the front to be able to get passengers in and out a little easier, and a very small door on the pilot side in the rear, and not the big barn cargo doors. So a little bit different. When folks see it, they say, that's a 206. Well, no, wait a minute, no it's not. Still a lot of utility. 206 is a great airplane. So some of the things we're going to talk about today will include these things. We're not going to limit ourselves to these. Again, if you've got any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll be glad to kind of divert off the flight plan here and talk about some of that. Some of the things I do not plan to cover in depth today that we can talk about offline is how to get to Alaska. We'll touch a little bit on that, but that's a whole detailed discussion all by itself. And if you want to know more about that, actually, Howard, how many folks have heard of Howard? Okay, a couple of hands. Very accomplished flight instructor, and he's got a great website, gives a lot of information about how to fly into Canada and then up into Alaska. So I would encourage you, if you want to know more about getting in and out of Canada, he's a great resource for that. Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association also has a lot of resources on their website on how to get into Canada and out of Canada back into Alaska. and also a lot of resources on flying in Alaska as well. So that's a really long address. I shortened it down for you, a little easier to remember that tiny URL there. So let's talk a little bit about geography. I was once asked by someone who was very serious when they asked me this question, and at first I thought they were joking, but I was a little embarrassed to find that they weren't. I was talking about Alaska and how cold it is, and how in the wintertime we have long hours of darkness, but yet in the summertime we have these long stretches of daylight, and how wonderful it is to live there, but how far away everything is from each other. And this person asked me, how can that be? I hear these things about Alaska, but we look on a map, and Alaska's down further south than California. And it's so small. How in the world does it take you so long to get places? And like I said, I was a little embarrassed to find that this person was serious in that question. Just so you know, Alaska is not really off the coast of Baja California. It's way up in the top corner up there. And when you look at a map, when you overlay Alaska at the same scale, this obviously is not the correct placement, but it's the same scale overlaid on top of each other. Kind of gives you a perspective of how big Alaska really is. So when we talk about Alaska and its size, there's over 6,000 miles of coastline around Alaska. That's more than all the lower 48 totalized. 17 of the top 20 mountain peaks in the United States are in Alaska. It's 9 times the size of the state of Washington. If you're from Texas, or you have friends from Texas, or if you've ever dealt with anybody from Texas, they're rather proud of the size of their state. Those of us in Alaska brag that we'll just cut Alaska in half and make Texas the 3rd largest state. It usually stops the conversation and the bragging about Texas. But a little bit more about Alaska. When we look at this map, we can see the lines here in the center. That is pretty much our entire road system in the state. And we see the red dots scattered around. Those are most, but not all, of the airports in the state. And when I say airport, we'll talk a little bit more about what I mean when I say that, because for most folks in the lower 48, you would probably consider it more of an airstrip instead of an airport. When we start talking about airstrips and landing sites, actually the parking lot across the street is a great place for me to operate my mall in and out of. So we tend to use places to get in and out of that a lot of folks normally wouldn't. So with this great expanse, and we had a little bit of a geography lesson, I encourage folks that when they can't wrap their head around this, to look at a globe instead of a Rand McNally atlas. But then I have to change that comment because most folks today don't know what a Rand McNally atlas is and haven't used one of those, and they just talk to their cell phone, and it gives them directions, sometimes the correct directions to get where they'd like to go. But there's a lot of things about flying in the part of the world that we do when it comes to climate, when it comes to great distances. We have to change the way we think when we operate. And one of those is the type of equipment that we carry in the aircraft with us. Not talking about the equipment installed in the airplanes. We'll talk a little bit about some of that here in a bit. But when it comes to survival equipment, the state of Alaska does have some requirements for us as pilots for equipment that we have to carry in the aircraft. That was an attempt back in the day. There were folks that were coming to Alaska and operating in Alaska that were not surviving. And it wasn't that they survived the crash, but it took a while to be able to be rescued. And what we were finding, and this again was before my time, but what was found is that folks didn't have the right equipment to be able to survive once they got on the ground. And so, typical government format, let's make a law. So they came up with this list of stuff. It's been modified through the years, and it's still a little outdated, and so we're actually got a process right now where we're talking with other aviation organizations in the state, trying to come up with a proposal to take to Juneau to see if we can modify the statute just a little bit. But Alaska Statute 2.35.110, you can look that up on the internet, but essentially we have to carry rations for a week for every passenger. We have to carry an axe or a hatchet. We have to carry a knife, fishing tackle, first aid kit, a head net for every passenger for the mosquitoes, and a sleeping bag or a wool blanket for every passenger over 4. And then in the wintertime, snowshoes and a sleeping bag and that sort of thing. So there's a list of requirements that you need to have in the airplane. That list, however, if you carry everything on that list, my personal opinion is you are still not equipped properly. It's a good start. There's some things that we used to have to carry, firearms, for instance. We're no longer required to carry a firearm. I still do. There's a lot of reasons why I do that. Some of it is for bear protection, but to be honest with you, I'm more concerned about a moose than I am about a bear. The other thing is, firearm is a pretty good signaling device. It's also a way for me to gather food if I need to be there a little longer. So the reason why that was dropped from the requirements is because folks were having problems getting through Canada. Canada's got a lot of firearm laws and regulations that make it difficult to travel with certain types of firearms, pistols especially. Long guns are a little easier. Shotguns, if they meet certain criteria, can come through there. Interesting side story, I was ferrying an aircraft to Alaska, stopped in Abbotsford. And at the time they had just moved the customs holding box to a new location. The control tower gave me a progressive taxi to the old one. I didn't realize that at the time, so I was late. On my arrival time, customs was a little perturbed, and they didn't care about the fact that I was flying a brand new airplane. I was ferrying a brand new aircraft to Alaska, and I was pretty proud of myself. I actually had a permanent hard copy of the registration, not the temporary pink slip, because you can't fly internationally with that. All they wanted was the $50 because I was carrying a .22 rifle. And the customs agent was rather nervous when she found out that I was carrying the ammunition in the same container as the rifle. And she told me I was breaking all kinds of Canadian laws, and it kind of went downhill from there. And I may have said something inappropriate that, ma'am, if I have to use this, things have gone horribly wrong. I don't need to worry about remembering what bag the ammo is, even though it's just a .22. This rifle is very ineffective as a club, so I really need to have all this. She didn't see the humor in that, and almost got to spend a little extra time in Abbotsford, but was eventually allowed to leave. Those of us in Alaska, another time coming through, they said, "Oh, you're from Alaska, where are your guns?" I didn't have one with me at the time. I said, "You're from Alaska, you have a gun, where is it?" "Well, it's at home." "Are you sure? We're gonna have to go through." So they went through the airplane. I said, "Well, again, may have said something inappropriate that I didn't like my own government knowing where my firearms are. I especially don't like a foreign government, only if it's Canada, to know where my firearms are." They didn't get the humor in that either. But anyway, firearms, personal preference. I personally do carry a firearm when I'm flying, and kind of went over that. So, satellite tracking devices. How many folks know what a spot tracker is, or an inReach device? Okay. So how many folks actually carry one of those devices with them? Okay, good. All right. So let's back up just a little bit. How many of you are in here because you have a plan to fly to Alaska in your own aircraft within the next 5 years? Okay, that's probably the majority of us in the room. How many of you are in here because you hope to someday maybe do it, but you don't have any set plans, you're just kind of figuring out what's going on? Okay, good. All right, how many of you have a lot of experience flying in Alaska, probably more than me, and you're in the room to fact check me and make sure I don't tell any lies? Yeah, go ahead, raise your hand. I'm not kidding. Anyway, so All right, no, that's great. It's a very doable trip. It's an enjoyable trip. And I encourage you to do your homework, though. And whatever you carry here, well, let me back up. Folks that fly primarily in the lower 48, do you carry any survival gear? Okay. And by survival gear, I mean if you carry something more than a Snickers bar. Okay. All right. Good. No, that's great. What I've got laid out on that table in the picture, I go through my gear twice a year. When I go from floats to skis, or skis back to floats on the mall, I repack my survival gear. I inspect it, go through and make sure that some of the things I carry actually have expiration dates, like some of the signaling equipment. Smoke flares and actually pyrotechnic flares do have expiration dates. You can see there, I do carry quite a bit of emergency medical gear. I am a EMT 3A, which in Alaska, we don't follow the National Registry. If you're familiar with emergency medicine, it's a half a step below a paramedic. So I do have a lot of emergency medical training. As a result of that, I do carry things that the average person probably would not. And I've modified that kit just about every year. I'll change what I'm carrying because something new and different has come out, something a little more utilitarian has been introduced, or do I really need to bring this invasive of a medical device in this situation? So there's a lot of back and forth. So I encourage you to, whatever you're carrying, to know how to use it. Because there's a lot of things in my kit that I know how to use that somebody else may not. And it probably wouldn't do them any good to open it up. Now, I not only carry a backpack with gear in it, I wear a vest. And it's an inflation vest. It's Nomex. It's built by Stearns. No, actually, it's no longer in production, but I wear this vest year-round when I'm flying. And there's a little bit of a saying and a story in Alaska that what you have on your person is your survival gear. What you have in a kit in the airplane is camping gear. And the way I explain it to folks that are flying with me, I says, if we have an unscheduled landing somewhere other than our intended destination, which is a nice way of saying if we crash, there'll be 3 phases to our adventure. One is a survival phase, 1 to 3 days. And what I have in my vest is enough to keep us alive and to signal search and rescue. Because that may be the only thing we actually get out of the airplane with. Right? You may not be able to get back into the aircraft to get the rest of your gear. So what I have in this bag, I classify that as camping gear. Because at that point, after the 3 to 5 day mark, now we're camping. Not the way we wanted to be camping, but we're camping. So now we've tried to come up with some kind of shelter. We're trying to gather food. We had to have found a water source somewhere because now we're beyond this initial phase of survival. And after about a week to 2 weeks, if we're still there, we just had a lifestyle change. And now it's time to start figuring out where we're going to build the cabin, how we're going to prepare for the winter, when are we going to shoot the moose, and who do we vote off the island first. Probably won't make it to that stage because we'll be rescued long before that point, hopefully. Right now, some of the current stats, depending on the time of year, the time of day, and where you may land other than your intended destination, it could take anywhere from 12 to 36 hours before you have search and rescue actually find you. In rare occasions, it's taken up to 3 to 5 days, and yet there are some crashes that have never been found. Okay, that's still a reality today. So with all these things, whatever you carry, whatever you're doing, you need to have thought through it, and you need to know how to use it. Okay? And that's pretty much no matter where you fly, but especially in Alaska. So you've kind of thought about what you're going to carry. Now you need to figure out aircraft considerations. So just kind of curious, what kind of aircraft are you guys operating? Just throw them out here.
Cessna 172, 180 horse.
Okay. Cessna 172, 180 horse. Makes it a great airplane. Okay. Cherokee 6, 300 horse. Great performer. Got a lot of flight time in those. It's a great airplane. Okay, a Pacer. And what was yours? Beach 36. Good airplane. Cessna 150 to Alaska. Actually, I have ferried a Cessna 150 from Ashtabula County, Ohio to Fairbanks. And I don't think I'll ever do that again. You will have a great trip, and you will be able to enjoy the scenery a lot longer than everybody else. Yep. All right, what other kind of aircraft are folks operating? Super Dove?
Cessna 140.
Cessna 140. Okay, what was?
Cessna 182.
182?
Cessna
172. Okay. 185? Okay. 172. All of those aircraft are already operating in Alaska. I haven't heard a single one of them that I don't see on a regular basis in Alaska. The Wright Flyer, however, has never flown in Alaska, and open cockpit used to be the standard, right? Well, not many of those flying around. What are the things that we kind of need to think about when it comes to picking out an aircraft to do a big tour around Alaska? Well, fuel considerations is one of them. Range, fuel capacity, comfort, capacity when it comes to cargo and payload. Some airplanes that were mentioned obviously have a lot more room. Cherokee 6 can haul a whole lot more than a 150 or even a 140, right? Okay, so fuel considerations. That's probably one of the bigger ones. How many folks, well, this is going to be easier to ask it the other way. How many airplanes do not have a GPS of some kind in the aircraft? That's what I figured. Nobody raise their hands. Okay, how many folks have an IFR certified panel mount GPS in their airplanes? Okay. How many folks have a handheld that's clipped on the yoke or in a Air Gizmos panel dock or some other handheld? Okay, good. That's a lot of it. How many folks fly with a iPad in the airplane? Okay, good. So GPS is a must these days. Just kind of curious, how many folks still plan a flight using an E6B and drawing a line on a chart and doing the wind correction angles and all of that? All right. So, student pilots?
I just like to keep it on the scale.
Okay. All right. No, that's good. So, we still teach our student pilots how to do that, right? But let's be honest with each other. When was the last time we really did that in the real world to be able to know where we're going and think that through? Probably not very often. What I will encourage you to do, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of this coming up, but paper charts are very important. GPS is great, helps us be very efficient with our routing, saves us a lot of fuel because we can move point to point, but equipment fails. And when it fails, you need to have a backup to that. And if nothing else, it's a great way to plan. It's a great way to think about your trip, to be able to draw lines on a map and start figuring out how you're going to get there. So next thing you need to consider is ELT, emergency locator transmitter. We're required to carry those on board, right? How many folks still have a 121.5 megahertz ELT? Do you like that? Okay. So here's the deal. You're still legal. That's good. Practically, though, when you get into a part of the world where it's pretty sparsely populated, there's very few roads, if any at all. Satellites are no longer listening to the 121.5 ELTs. So you're relying on the good graces of other folks flying to listen for you. 406 megahertz ELT is the new standard for that. It only takes a fraction of a second of that signal to be transmitted. Satellites will pick it up, get the serial number that's embedded in that digital code. They at least know who they should be out looking for. Okay? Depending on your type of flying, 121.5 may be all you need. In Alaska, I really encourage folks to fly with a 406 megahertz ELT. don't want to equip your aircraft with that, at least carry a personal locator beacon. Some of these now are really tiny, will fit in your shirt pocket. And it's basically a civilian version of a 406 megahertz ELT. So if you don't want to invest in that in your aircraft, yet you still want to come fly to Alaska in it, do us all a favor and at least buy a personal locator beacon. Or one of the satellite tracking devices that do a great job of leaving a breadcrumb trail that somebody could go back and follow. ADS-B, let's talk about that for just a second. We'll talk a little more in depth here. Actually, let me go to this slide. So how many folks have equipped with ADS-B already? How many folks plan to equip with ADS-B before the 2020 deadline? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about ADS-B in Alaska. This graphic here, horrible choice of colors that the FAA chose to overlay these two things, but the darker colors, it's probably easier to see it up here on the north slope. That dark circle is traditional radar. The lighter colored is ADS-B coverage. And this is at 3,000 feet AGL. I will tell you that most general aviation pilots get pretty scared of heights above 3,000 foot AGL. Okay, besides you can't really see the scenery, what's the point, right? So there's pretty limited coverage for ADS-B in the state of Alaska. Now what we need to also understand about ADS-B is when we look at the ADS-B-N component, that information that's being broadcast, because Alaska is so sparsely covered, we have huge gaps in being able to get the METARs and the TAFs and the NEXRAD radar, okay? And so there are certain areas of the state where you will not find any information on ADS-B in the aircraft. So how many folks subscribe to Sirius XM when it comes to weather data in the cockpit? Okay. The last time I gave this talk yesterday, there were several folks that had that question. XM does not have coverage for Alaska. Their footprint does not reach Alaska. So if you subscribe to that service for weather, you will not be able to use that in Alaska. Okay. Just is not available. So back to some services on the ground. When I first told you those red dots that were on the map, those are some of the airports around the state. When you land there, you will probably be surprised by the lack of services. There's no FBOs per se. Fuel is very sparse around the state. You need to plan ahead. You need to call ahead. You need to figure out what you're going to do for fuel stops. Now, some of the larger villages, larger communities do have fuel. And I asked yesterday, but it seems like the average, just ballpark price for avgas down here is around $5 a gallon. Is that kind of close, ballpark? You can expect to pay considerably more than that in places like McGrath and Galena and Bethel and Bettles and Cots and Nome. You can pay up to $15 a gallon. I've actually, I think the highest I've paid is $22 a gallon. At that point, I didn't care what it cost because I had to have it. So plan ahead. When you get to some of these places, it's just a gravel runway. There may be an area where you can park. Usually is some kind of a gravel apron, but you probably won't find any permanent tie down. So you need to bring some tie down equipment. Some of these villages, you're not going to be able to have any ground transportation. And if you're out flying around the state, you're camping overnight in places, I would advise you to be extremely cautious with what you carry when it comes to alcohol. A lot of the villages in Alaska are dry or damp, depending on the scenario. And if you import alcohol into a village, you have now become a bootlegger, and there's some serious repercussions for that. Okay, so be careful if you're going to do that. Even if you're bringing it for your own consumption, doesn't matter. Okay, and remember, you are in the last frontier. There's a lot of things as far as infrastructure that we simply just don't have, that you are probably accustomed to here in the lower 48. So once you're in the air, Alaska does not have LIDOS flight service. We still have the FAA providing flight service information for us. And so that has its benefits. We're not dealing with somebody who's 1,000 miles away and has very little local knowledge of where we are. We're dealing with folks that have some knowledge about the terrain, the microclimate when it comes to weather. Not quite as good as it used to be when we had flight service stations everywhere, but still pretty good when it comes to that. There's 3 full-time flight stations in Alaska: Fairbanks, Kenai, and Juneau, and then 14 seasonal or part-time flight service stations, and depending on where you are in the state as to whether or not they're part-time or just seasonal. Palmer, Talkeetna, McGrath. McGrath will spool up here when the Iditarod starts in a couple weeks, and then after the Iditarod, they'll shut back down and wait till summer and start that flight station up again. So some places you can actually walk in and talk to a real live briefer again. A lot of you may be nostalgic about those days when you can actually talk to a real person. They can pull out the charts, they can show you what's going on. Very, very helpful. We still have that ability in Alaska at these flight service stations. So flight plans and flight following. Flight following can be a little difficult because you simply just don't have the communication ability, because the RCOs and things are pretty widely spaced. Flight plans can be a little problematic if you're not going to an airport that has an RCO, because how do you close that flight plan if you can't get in touch with somebody? Cell phones will work in some of the villages, depending on your carrier, but plan on your cell phone's not working. So a lot of folks will carry a satellite phone. Problem is, if you call 1-800-weather brief on a satellite phone, you're not going to get Alaska, you're going to get Leidos. Trying to tell Leidos where you are and how you're closing a flight plan can be a little problematic when you're in the middle of nowhere on a satellite phone. So plan ahead with that. I do encourage you to follow flight plan though. It really does help with the search and rescue times. So we talked about ADSB just a little bit. SUAS, we do have a lot of differences in Alaska when it comes to airspace. And so, let's see. Yeah, got some of these slides out of order here. But SUAS, Special Use Airspace Information Service. We do have a lot of military operations areas in the state, and it's a very big state, and there's a lot of military activity in Alaska. If you look at Alaska on a globe, which again, not Rand McNally, but on a globe, and you see Alaska in the center of what you're looking at, and then look at the hemisphere that you're able to see from that point. Alaska is a very, very strategic location in the world, especially now with our president and his colorful names for a certain person leading a country in North Korea, and some of the things that could be happening there. So our military is very active in our state. With that comes some compromise when it comes to sharing airspace. How many folks here in the lower 48, when they come upon a military operations area, a MOA, will fly through a MOA or go around it? How many folks will fly through it? If you check first, how many folks just as general rule just fly around it? Okay. You won't be able to do that in Alaska. They're too big. They're just simply too big to do that. So you're going to have to figure out how to get through them. So we know on the sectional charts, we've got the published times that most of these areas will be active. And that little clause that says, and other times by NOTAM, right? So with that, we being the aviation industry in the state, has gone to the Air Force and to the Army and said, look, we need to be able to coordinate a little better. And so what we've helped establish and what's been working now since about 1995, been a very successful program of a special use airspace information service where we can call them ahead of time and they can give us the plan status of these airspaces, or we can call on a VHF frequency while we're airborne and they can give us the real-time status of all this airspace. What that allows us to do is to know what area may be active and what we can anticipate. They're not going to give us traffic separation, but they'll tell you, well, we've got 5 fighters up in the northeast corner of the Yukon Low. We're you're going to be heading south of all that stuff, shouldn't have any encounters with any fast movers. In turn, what that person will do is they will then pass that information on to those fast movers and say, hey, by the way, you got a Super Cub passing low level in the southern part of the Yukon MOA, so just keep an eye out for them. So there's that sharing of information back and forth. This program has been very successful, and I say that because it's kind of hard to measure, but my matrix for measuring that is we have not had a swapping of paint or exchange of metal. We haven't had any airborne mid-air collisions or anything with military traffic. And when you look at this area on a map, it is huge. You can see back at this particular area through here, that's over 300 miles across. And you just simply can't fly around that. You've got to figure out how to get through it. That shortened URL is a great brochure there that walks you through all the airspace, what you can anticipate, how to work through policy and range control. So let's see, going back to some more flight planning, other places to get good information. We have the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit for the National Weather Service. Here in the lower 48, the Aviation Weather Center, the AWC, would probably be the closest equivalent that you may be familiar with. The Alaska Aviation Weather Unit does a great job of coming up with aviation-specific graphics, and their accuracy has vastly improved over the years. Their forecasting has gotten much, much better. And so it's a great resource to be able to do that. That website there, weather.gov/AAWU, gives you a lot of great information. I encourage you to go look at that, even if you're not planning on flying Alaska. Just some pretty good information there. One of the other great resources we have for Alaska are weather cameras. How many folks have heard of the Alaska Weather Camera Program? How many folks go look at the weather cameras in Alaska just because they're cool to see parts of the state? That's what we find. A lot of folks in the lower 48 look at these cameras pretty regularly. So we all know that a picture's worth 1,000 words at least, right? Especially when it comes to figuring out what the weather's going to be. So this website was recently updated. This is the new site, and there's still some more changes to come. I've been working with the weather camera program. I was one of the beta testers for this site. There's a lot of great stuff that's already been implemented, and there's some pretty cool things coming down the road. But what we've got is most places have 4 cameras that you can see all 4 quadrants, and you can see what's really going on. We can see in this picture, it's kind of an overcast, hazy morning. You can see a hill out here in the distance. If you click on that image, it will then pull up a clear day image to compare the current to the clear day. There's some markers out there as far as distance. Helps you get a better visualization of ceilings and visibility. So a great, great resource. Also has a lot of other data that's embedded up here. These bars, color-coded, the first big one are the METAR, and then these are the forecast periods for the terminal area forecast. So blue being marginal VFR, and you can see that it's forecasted to actually get worse in Tanana in a couple of forecast periods, but then should turn to VFR eventually. So really great resource to be able to visually see kind of what the weather's going to be doing. How many folks have seen this book? All right, the Alaska Supplement, incredible resource. If you use ForeFlight or some of the other apps, that document is there in that format. Personally, I think it's easier to use on the iPad because you can do a search. It's a searchable PDF. The hard copy, though, can be a little problematic because it's over 500 pages. Trying to find the information you're looking for. There's a table of contents, but it's very, very, well, it's not a very good table of contents. And there is no index in the printed version. So it is kind of hard to find what you're looking for sometimes. But you pretty much need to have a copy of that. The running joke in Alaska is that if you've got one less than 10 years old, you're good. We all know that information gets changed and updated, you need to keep them current. But this is a great resource. You can buy it any place that you're buying your charts now. Sporties sells them. And I'm sure some of the local places here would have them just because of the proximity to Alaska. One of the sections in that Alaska supplement is the Part 93 airspace around Anchorage. So Anchorage is a Class C airspace. That's probably the busiest, most congested airspace in the state. We do not have any Class B airspace. And in 2020, this will be the only part of the state that you'll be required to be ADS-B out. Is within or above the Anchorage Class C or above flight level 180. Alaska was able to get an exemption so that you could fly above 10,000 feet and not be ADS-B equipped. We were able to do that because some of our terrain, being what it is, very difficult to expect people to do that. So the Anchorage airspace is so complicated that we have our own part to the FARs, along with some other places in the lower 48, Part 93 airspace. And so in the Alaska supplement, it has some very detailed procedures to be able to get in and out of the Anchorage Bowl. If you plan on going into Anchorage, please study these. Please understand what's going on. If you don't, find a flight instructor to help you. And you can call someone in Anchorage and they'll be glad to walk you through some of this stuff. But if you do fly into this airspace, please deal with Anchorage approach. Don't just try to come in and talk to Merrill Tower or Lake Hood Tower. Talk to Anchorage approach first. Tell them you're unfamiliar with the area and they will hold your hand and walk you along. You may actually want to say that you're a student pilot. Even if you're not, we were all student pilots at one time, right? And we all know that controllers are a little more forgiving when they know they're working with someone unfamiliar with the area. So again, study these before you go. This is just one example of how to get into Lake Hood, one of the approaches. And that's the east route, is what that one's labeled. There's a west route, there's several others to get in and out. But it gives you detailed information on how to get in and out of the airspace. How many folks think that they're going to go fly around Mount McKinley, or now officially Denali, which is what we've called it forever? Big mountain, a lot of air traffic around that airspace. That's how the climbers get to base camp, to actually climb Denali. And it can be rather daunting flying through the mountains. If you've got mountain flying experience here in the lower 48, don't think that you can fly in the Alaska range and it'd be like flying through the Rockies. We're talking about some pretty serious chunks of rock here. Okay? Wind and weather, just like any other mountainous region, can change in an instant. And depending on the type of aircraft you're flying as to whether or not you can operate in those areas. Because of the air tour industry and because of some of the other activities that happen there, actually the Denali National Park is managed by the Park Service rather heavily by using aviation assets. Park rangers are flying around in aircraft, a lot of game surveys, a lot of geographical surveys, a lot of things that are happening in the park with aviation, whether it's helicopters or fixed wing. So there's some information in the Alaska supplement about that. This URL here goes to the National Park Service website. It gives you some more details, gives you a long list of latitude and longitude waypoints. There's actually a GPX file that you can download and then install that on your handheld GPS that will display all these waypoints on your moving map. When you do that, you won't be able to see anything else on your map because there are so many of those waypoints. And the air tour operators are calling out these points, and I'll tell you, after flying as many years as I have in Alaska, I still don't know all these points. And when they're calling them out, I don't know where they are either. So if you think you want to go fly around Denali, I would highly recommend that you go to Talkeetna, land your airplane in Talkeetna, walk into town, short walk less than a mile, grab you a hamburger, and buy yourself a seat from one of the local air taxis and ride in a turbine otter and enjoy the mountain that way. And if you're lucky, you'll get to sit as co-pilot, and you get to see the mountain in a way that you wouldn't be able to in your own airplane, and you don't have to worry about where you are and how to get in and out there. Okay? It's a great trip. I've landed up at the Hilton Glacier in my own aircraft. I've landed up there with K2 Aviation as one of the operators there out of Talkeetna. It's a great experience. It's a lot of fun, but it can be rather dangerous. So plan accordingly. One of the other things that's kind of unique about Alaska, some of what we're talking about would qualify for the ground portion of the biannual flight review, but just kind of curious if somebody can tell me what a CTAF is.
Common traffic advisory.
Common Traffic Advisory Frequency, that's right. What is the official definition that we read in the AIM when it talks about a CTAF? What would the area be that it's pertaining to? Okay, we got a few answers out here. We're gonna have to spend a little more time in ground school, I can see, before I can sign you off for your biennial, but that's all right. It's not a pass-fail, right? It's all instruction. So, in the lower 48, a CTAF is the area, the 10 nautical mile ring around an airport. Okay, that's the official area that we talk about when we mention CTAF. In Alaska, we were able to get that rule, that definition changed to now include larger areas. And as you can see on this map, we've got huge boundaries here, which is kind of hard to see the scale, but this whole area is 22.9. You come back in this area, it's 22.8. Up here is 123.6. Down here is 122.7. So, unfortunately, we changed all this because we lost some friends. There were a series of mid-air collisions, some of them extremely tragic. And what we realized when we started going back in the investigation is that folks were on the proper frequencies, and they were talking. But even though they were on the proper frequency, they were in the same airspace, operating out of different landing zones, that now these CTAF areas were overlapping. And so depending on where you were going as to which one you were technically supposed to be on, right? What we found is that folks were on the proper frequency, but they were not able to communicate with each other and deconflict their own traffic. As a result, we had a few loss of life. So what we did is we worked with the FAA, and we now have designated these areas to where every landing surface within the boundary of these areas will have the same frequency to talk on. That has a drawback that now we have some frequency congestion that we didn't have before, so we have to have some discipline when it comes to what we say and how long we talk on the radio. But it's helped tremendously. Me being a pilot based north of the Alaska Range, when I come down to Anchorage, I'm very cautious flying through this area because I was part of this working group to come up with this plan, and it's pretty spooky the amount of aircraft that's flying around in this area. When we get back over here to the Wasilla, Palmer, Willow, Big Lake area, that is the highest concentration of registered airports anywhere in the world. Alaskans like our freedom, we like aviation, and if you've got enough room in your backyard to have a runway, you do. And when you've got so many places that somebody could be popping up in their airplane flying somewhere, it's pretty spooky. There's a lot of folks popping up and down out of their backyards. And so if you're going to fly in this area, I strongly encourage you to be in contact with Anchorage Approach. They will help you deconflict with this traffic and then stay above where a lot of folks are flying downward. So just some general recommendations here for coming to Alaska. Plan ahead. Do your homework. Spend as much time as you think, and then double it with looking at charts, planning ahead, reading some things on the forums. Supercubs.org has a great forum. They've got a couple of threads there about people who've made trips to Alaska where they kind of journaled that and documented some of their experiences going through there. That's a pretty active community. If you're a member of the Alaska Airmen's Association, which I highly encourage you to be, that we have access to the last edition that we kind of updated, which was back in 2009, of the Alaska Airmen's Logbook. It's a very detailed book about different parts of the state, some of the things to look out for, and some of the local knowledge. It's a great place to look at. It's available on our website in the members only section. If you become a member, you'll have access to that. Be flexible though. You may have this great plan all mapped out, and you've got it scheduled down to the hour. Be flexible. Don't push the weather. Please don't. I've lost good friends who pushed the weather and didn't make it. And there's really no excuse for losing your friends that way. We've lost tourists who've come up, even some on guided tours where it's a convoy of aircraft that are in this group. Had a tragic accident several years ago. The scout plane was going out ahead and wound up crashing. So be careful. Do your homework. One of the things that I explain to folks when I have passengers, you know, we obviously have a plan. We've got someplace we want to go. We've got something that we're trying to do. But in the end, what should the goal be? The goal should be that we come home to our families and not in a pine box or a spruce box for Alaska. I've got no problems delaying a flight. A few hours, a few days. I've got no problems being late. I've got serious issues with being years too early. And what I mean by that is I don't want to die too soon. So enjoy your trip. Don't push so hard that the destination is the only thing you're concerned about, because the journey to get there, sometimes those are the best stories, right? The best memories that we all have, probably something that was unplanned and unintended, right? We were trying to do this, but we couldn't. This is the result of what happened. That's the making of a great hangar flying story, right? And we don't want it to end with, they probably shouldn't have taken off, and that's why he died. Okay. So, do we have any questions from anybody about Alaska or flying in general up there, or anything else? Well, this is an easy crowd. I'm sorry?
What are the rules about flying for Alaska? Surpass going all the way through Canada and Alaska?
So if you have the capability of bypassing Canada and not landing, that is a very easy way to do it. And technically, if you've never set foot on Canadian soil, you don't have to worry about Canadian customs or clearing U.S. customs when you come back. EAPIS is of course the electronic form to be able to go online and put in your whole list of folks on your aircraft and all that documentation. Again, I'm not an expert in the EAPIS. My understanding is if you do not land in a foreign country, if you're just overflying, you do not have to fill out an EAPIS report. But some of those sites I mentioned earlier in the presentation give you a much more detailed explanation of that whole program. One thing I will say about EAPIS is that you have to do that online. You can't pick up the phone and call and do an EAPIS report, which is a little problematic for some places in Alaska, because you may not have internet access. So you kind of have to plan ahead. There are ways to go in and pre-file and have a date several days out with that paperwork. So plan ahead. All right, any other questions?
Do you routinely get the FCC station operator license so that you can use your radio?
Okay, so the question is the FCC radio station license. So you're not required to have that in Alaska or here in the lower 48, but you are required to have that if you fly international. And so actually, if you overfly foreign airspace, you still would have to have it, I understand. It's a very easy thing to get. You go online, you fill out some forms online, pay your money, and kind of off you go. There's no FCC test like a ham radio license test or anything. So it's very simple to do. Okay? Well, great. So just one last thing, a little bit of shameless promotion here. Alaska Airmen's Association gives away an airplane every year. And we're over here at booth 706, and we're selling raffle tickets for that. It's a huge fundraiser for our organization. That money goes towards all kinds of great youth outreach and scholarship programs and other government advocacy type things that we do as an association. So this year is a Super Cub, 150 horse Super Cub that'll come with a set of floats, a set of bush wheels, and a set of regular wheels. Second place prize is a set of floats for 180, 185, 182 range aircraft, and several other prizes down along the way. So if you got any more questions, feel free to come up and talk with me here at the end, but appreciate you being here. If you come to Alaska, have a great time.